So I want to start, Ramesh, by asking you to tell us when you first met or saw Ramdas.
Well, I met him probably a little bit before you did when he first came back from India and was first Ramdas. And I was expecting to meet Richard Alpert of Leary and Alpert fame or infamy, and hear about better living through modern chemistry. And instead, this was in college, and it's kind of frozen mud in the Northeast in March. And this guy walks in wearing sort of a white dress, barefoot in the mud, the frozen mud of the Northeast, with a long beard. And he did not look like a Harvard professor anymore. And he gave a talk in one of the, it was like a lounge in one of the colleges at where I was at school at Wesleyan in Connecticut, where he had also done his master's degree. And he'd been invited by some of uh, uh, his students who were by then teaching psychology at Wesleyan. And he'd gotten the invitation in India. So it was the first talk that he gave when he came back to the States. And he spoke from 7 in the evening until 3 in the morning.
Wow. You were at his
Um,
first public talk as Ramdas, right?
yeah.
What did you think?
Um, well, at some point, someone turned off the lights and there was just his voice in the darkness. And it was like being transported into another plane of something. And when I got to India, a bit over 2 years later, I realized that Guru, who he called Maharaji and was sometimes called Neem Karoli Baba, which basically was the name of a train station in India. And this old man in a blanket had essentially uh, um, pulled me in through Ramdas, across from the other side of the globe. And the feeling was of a change in point of view. And I think that was a lot of what Ramdas was working on in himself in that time, in the trying to come to terms with the change in his identity that had been wrought through these really, incredible alterations of his being through, well, starting with psychology, then psychedelics and yoga.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I just like to say how I met him,
Mm.
which was in 1972, a few years after you did. I was a 26-year-old reporter and I was ambitious and I was on the rise. I was just determined to make a career for myself writing for magazines to begin with. And I had written for some of the most prestigious magazines in the country, for Harper's, Esquire, The Atlantic, the New York Times Magazine, Rolling Stone. And I was married to a man who was the primo rock and roll disc jockey in New York on the new FM rock station. And I was miserable. I was depressed and anxious. Every time I got an assignment to write a new article, I would freeze up and think, I was a fake and I'd done it before, but it was a fluke and I didn't know if I could do it again. And I was just really not in a good inner state, even though it seemed like everything from the outside was terrific. And then somebody gave me a copy of Be Here Now, and I opened the introduction, and the first phrase that caught me was Richard Alpert said he had been a neurotic Jewish overachiever whose all his achievements had not brought him any happiness or joy. And I was a neurotic Jewish overachiever who was unhappy. And when I read about how he had attained a completely different inner state of peace, of equanimity, of joy, and of love, I wanted that. How did you connect with him? How did you become either a student or a fellow traveler or whatever? How did you get into relationship with him from that first hit at Wesleyan?
Well, somewhat, as happened with you, I went to see him the next day. He was staying over with, their names were Sarah and David Winter, who were the people that had invited him to campus. And as you had, I wanted more of that. And I talked to him further, and I went up to visit him at where he was staying at their family kind of summer place farm up in New Hampshire, in Franklin, New Hampshire, which was about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from, I guess it was 2 hours from where I was in Connecticut. So I would drive up there on the weekends, and sometimes his family was there, but not very often. And he was teaching me what he had learned. He started teaching me yoga and meditation. And the year after that, there was kind of a summer camp at the farm there. It was like yoga camp. And there is a film of some of that called Sunseed that has some of that footage in it. And there was a couple that turned up, and more and more people kept sort of walking up the driveway there. And by the end of that summer, there were probably 40 people camping in the woods of his father's farm. And becoming yogis.
I just want to say that at that time in New York, if you had looked in the phone book for yoga, there were maybe 3 or 4 listings. Today,
Yeah.
if you look for yoga, it's 30 pages of listings. It was, it was considered kooky.
Well, when you look at what he put down in Be Here Now 50 years ago, and this year, I think, is the 50th anniversary of Be Here Now's publication. It really is the foundation of what has become yoga in the West. And he really, and he taught it, himself for a long time. And then occasionally had other people teaching. And he had also brought back what has become the chanting and kirtan part of the yoga scene, which is ably led by a couple of other folks who were students of his, particularly Krishnadas and Jayutal, and the fellow that originally introduced him to Maharaji, who was Bhagwan Das. And that's really, it's changed the vocabulary of our culture. And I think, not just us, but there were an awful lot of folks carrying that book in backpacks for a few years after that.
Yes.
And,
so then you went to India with him, I believe.
well, I went before he came. That it was his return for the second time to India, and I went with Krishnadas and Danny Goleman, who has written. Yeah. So we got there before he did. We were hanging out with Maharaji for maybe a month and a half before Ram Dass made it back. He had kind of sidetracked with a guru named, or a teacher named Muktananda, who started the Siddha Yoga Foundation, had a big scene in the West also. And Ram Dass was kind of his front man on his world tour.
Ram Dass, the first time he went to India, spent 6 months near the Guru's ashram.
Mm-hmm.
His life changed, and he came back he went as Richard Alpert, came back as Ram Dass. How did he learn so much so fast? I mean, I know people who have been meditating for 30, 40 years and doing all kinds of spiritual work, and they don't have what he had after 6 months, which was
Yeah.
the ability to communicate it with this truth with others, and to embody love and draw people into that. How did he get there so fast, do you think?
Well, when you look, and as he did in the book, and look back on his life, there was a lot of preparation for that moment. And I think that his understanding of the mind through psychology, and then particularly his explorations of
Psychedelics, right?
psychedelics, but the ways that for those of you who have tried strong psychedelics, it forces you to let go. I mean, otherwise you end up having a bad trip, because essentially it's a deconstruction process of the ego, which makes room for an experience of the deeper planes of our being. I don't know. I don't like the planes model anymore. It doesn't even work for me. But
There were dozens
it's touching your inner being in a much more profound way than we are most of the time when we're occupied with our thoughts and conceptions of how things are. And that ability to change from one view to another, to let go, that he acquired from 300 psychedelic trips.
Yeah.
And he guided trips for a lot of other people as part of that too. So he really knew how that went. But the problem was that he expressed often was that he kept coming down afterwards. Yeah. So I think he saw yoga as a life raft that way, and he really threw himself into it.
Yeah, completely. That's the thing. Whatever he did, he went in 100%, 500%.
And there was nothing else to do either. I mean, he's at this little temple in the Himalayas with nobody else that speaks English. And he's being given intensive instruction in yoga and pranayama and meditation. And it's pretty freezing cold. There's, I'll see if I can pull it up maybe while we're playing, but
when I asked Ram Dass the same question, how did you evolve so fast? He said, it's only recently that I realized that I've been using Maharaji as an excuse for why I know what I know. And, that he had put it all on Maharaji, but in fact, I mean, the conclusion I've come to is that he just was born with this destiny and this proclivity that manifested itself pretty early in his life, in his 30s.
Yeah, I think that a combination of all of the parts of his life that, left him in that feeling of dissatisfaction and frustration that you described in your life also, really motivated him to change himself.
What gave you the idea to do the book with him, and how did Ram Dass feel about writing a biography?
Well, he didn't really want to do it. I mean, I kind of talked him into it. And we had done this other book together, which it was, there are all these sort of interesting ways that things come into being through what you might think of as coincidence or synchronicity, but which I don't believe in anymore. But I told Ram Dass I wanted to do this book, and he said he didn't want to do it. And he's, basically he's Mr. Be Here Now. And he was not into living in the past. So we finally agreed on sort of framing it, looking back as if through Maharaji's eyes, of looking at his life from that other place of love and wisdom.
Was
And
there anything that surprised you in the process? I know it was almost 10 years you spent drawing it out of him and working on it.
oh yeah, lots. I mean, I didn't know him before he was Ram Dass. So I learned quite a lot about his family and his childhood and the psychedelic time, and some of those, crazy adventures like flying a small plane on acid and things like that, that he didn't talk about in his lectures very much.
Yeah, I think because this is such a momentous time right now in our country, that I wanted to ask you because I've asked myself, what would Ram Dass have said? How would he have responded to the current national crisis that has been unfolding? I know that in the book, he talks a lot about service and service from love, not from anger. He said, he said at peace rallies, I see a lot of angry people, and that wasn't the way to serve and bring about change, that it had to come from love. What advice, what do you think he might have said about the current situation?
Well, I don't know, but I can tell you that he always had whoever he liked least politically on his puja table, on his altar. And he felt like he was trying to see that individual as a soul, no matter how bad their individual karma in that moment might be. And Trump was on his puja table also. And otherwise, I think he would have seen this chaos and this plague year as a really important time to practice. This is the time then the rubber meets the road with your spiritual work. And sometimes he used to tell people, if you want to see how you're doing with your spiritual practice, go stay with your family for a week. But this is staying with your family for a year. I think the techniques that he taught, they're both the sort of mental and psychological pieces, and the devotional practices, and just even the physical yoga is very helpful when we're stuck in these situations. And I hope that what has come through over time from him is useful to people. And we've put a lot of his talks and lectures up on ramdass.org, which is the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation that has supported his teachings for the last 12 years or so.